Hello and welcome to Property Matters. I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me again on the subject of the spring statement is John Howard, who's a developer, entrepreneur, author, investor, and as I said last time, thoroughly good chap.
Yeah, you said that twice now. I'll start believing it soon.
Well, we're very pleased to have you here, John. We
Thank you.
really are. You're one of the few people who have a very good, comprehensive view and understanding of the whole market, which is very valuable.
Thank you. Well, I've been at it for over 40 years, and there's not much I haven't done, a bit like you, Stephen, really.
And it don't seem a day too long.
And I haven't got it all right either. None of us have.
Have any of us?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, look, again, just as a reminder, we're talking about the spring statement and what sort of effect it's had on the market. And essentially, I suppose we're talking about the residential market. Yes. I do note there's very little conversation about commercial leases, lets, or property ownership. It seems to be an area that's ignored by government.
It's very interesting, isn't it? They seem to ignore it at the moment. I mean, they are talking about changing the rate system, which for me, the commercial rates needs to be linked to VAT payments. I just don't understand.
When were the houses last valued? Was it 91?
91 or something. It's madness, absolute madness. The whole thing is crackers. Yeah.
Although the way the property market's going at the moment, we might get back to the 91 values.
Well, the biggest problem with commercial rates, of course, is that every local authority only keeps 10%. The rest goes to central government. Right. So all these towns and cities that are struggling and could reduce the rates to nothing to help generate new tenants and so on, can't do so.
Right. Now that leads me nicely into our next point of discussion, which is this. Fine, we've talked about the practicalities, the viability, the possibility of building all these 1.5 million homes. What we haven't talked about is, are the facilities that are needed for those new towns, villages, housing developments, are the things like hospitals, doctors' surgeries, schools, shops, high streets? Has all that been considered? Who's going to provide all this?
Well, that's all really infrastructure to a great extent.
And who's going to provide that?
Well, that has to be provided by the property developer, the house builder. It all comes off.
Well, that's the theory.
It all comes off. It all comes off the price, ultimately, doesn't it? But of course, all those things, sewers. I mean, can you imagine? Say you're building 500 houses, the sewers that are required, the energy, the electricity that's required, whole thing to get all that up and water. You know, there's not enough water in East Anglia, so we're having a pipe made all the way from the north of England down at the moment to supply certain developments. Cannot go ahead at the moment because there's no water. It's absolutely crackers.
Well, you should come to London. We can't afford any water.
Well,
here.
You can't afford it here, no. But I haven't got a lot of sympathy for you lot. But you know, actually, we should be building many, many more homes in the north of the country, not the south. The south has got too many already. It, really has, and we need to give people tax incentives to move up north, businesses tax incentives to move up north in order to balance it up, because it's crazy at the moment.
Well, I suppose it is, but I think many years back, I mean, electrifying the train line to Peterborough was going to be the answer to London overspill. But actually nobody really wanted to go and work in Peterborough, did they? So
that's a bit rude about Peterborough, isn't it?
Well, it is, but that's the fact of it, isn't it? But it's taken many, many years to just settle down. It's, I've been involved in developments in various parts of London. I can think of one particularly at Tower Bridge. It took 25 years for that to really settle down and become a proper postcode, a proper area with infrastructure, with shops, with facilities.
And that's London.
And that's London.
Where it's much easier.
Yeah.
So it is a major problem. You do need the infrastructure and the community-based schools and even a pub, may I say, probably.
Yeah. But I mean, when Boris Johnson was in power, he announced this 40 new hospitals. Well, I think, if I've read the papers right and the commentaries over the years since then, I think he and others around him would probably argue, oh, well, it wasn't as simple as that. That included refurbishment of existing ones.
All of a sudden,
and, you know, so none of these schemes or ideas are easy to implement. And certainly within a sort of 4 to 5 year political cycle,
got no chance of building.
No chance.
No chance. They need to be in for at least 10 years to get anything like that done. And actually, I think where Angela Rayner is probably right is she's saying the big infrastructure issues like hospitals, prisons, and so on shouldn't be dealt with at local authority level. They should be dealt with at government level. They should be rubber stamped and got on with. And I think without having the right to appeal against them. And what's called a judicial review, which is this
but in my view, they ought to be binding. I know my father always used to say, you'll never have good government while you've got a 4 to 5 year political cycle.
I agree with that.
Because to get anything done that needs to be done, you won't get in again.
Well, you have to do it. You have to be radical in the first year, really radical. And you have to move very quickly because by the time the 4th year comes and the 5th year comes, you're electioneering. You know, you're trying to get back in. So you've got a very, very small window in order to impress people. And then you need that period of time to actually make it happen once you've agreed that decision. And that's NHS is a great example of that. And why has NHS never been reformed properly? Because no one's got the balls to do it within the time period of an election, but 5 years.
But both Rayner and West Streeting, for instance, in health, they are now talking about 10-year plans, aren't they? But unless those plans are binding on the next government that comes in, you've got to. I mean, I think I sort of agreed with my dad's sentiments. I'm not quite sure that I agreed with probably what the solution was.
I agree, and I think it is a major problem for any government, and that's why it's all short-termism, isn't it?
Yes,
that's what it is.
Yes, absolutely. And again, I can remember many years ago going to Japan and talking to leader of a very big company that had become global, and I said, "How have you done this?" And he said, "Because our government gave us 25-year money." And so he said I could plan, I could hedge against inflation, I could hedge against currency exchange. I knew where my money was coming from all that period of time, so we really could plan. And he said, the economies of the West just couldn't match it.
No, absolutely they can't, because it's too short term. I agree, totally.
And again, with plan, in our earlier program, you alluded to planning taking so long and being so expensive, especially if you have to go to appeal. I mean, you could be talking millions.
Yes, and at least a year, another year, at least.
So there we are. So your view is these facilities are going to be provided or not?
Well, they have to be provided, and everyone's got an example watching this show where those facilities have not been provided. They've whacked a load of houses up, and the doctor's surgery hasn't turned up, and the schools are overflowing, and the doctor's surgery down the road is overflowing, and all the rest of it. But what you've got to remember, we've had 10 million more people come into this country since 2010. 10 million more. How on earth can any infrastructure cope with that? Especially when every decision takes forever.
Yes.
Very difficult.
Now, again, talking of sort of affordability and facilities, do you think the government should do more to make I'm not going to say low-cost mortgages, but low-deposit mortgages available to especially younger people?
Well, this is very interesting because Angela Rayner has said that she's going to bring out a product which has a 5% deposit only for first-time buyers. Now, she keeps mentioning it, but she doesn't mention any of the detail. And of course, the devil is always in the detail. Maybe the problem is she can't get the financial institutions to agree to it.
Well, look,
that would be that's what I hear on the grapevine.
Listen, I've said this before, John. You used to see Osborne and Cameron come out with their high-vis jackets and hard hats.
That's
and
the one.
We're going to build this. Well, who's we? Who's the we in this building?
The other thing is a lot of people.
Who's the finance?
Well, exactly. The other thing is, the Help to Buy scheme that the Conservatives came up with was a very good scheme. It took a lot of stick from people, but it helped 700,000 first-time buyers. Now, they won't want to do anything like that because the Conservatives came up with it. They don't like the name Homes England, I'm sure, because the Conservatives came up with it. They don't like the idea of permissive development, which came in 2012, which allowed offices to be converted into residential. And by the way, that could be increased greatly as well, because you could allow PD on care homes rather than having to prove there's no commercial use for it first. You could do it on pubs. You could do it on doctor surgeries that are redundant, hospitals that are redundant. They could, very easy win that would be for the government, but they haven't gone down that route. But it could be an easy win. But going back to the original question, what I think Michael Gove tried to do was to say, look, these young people, may not be that young these days, can afford to pay the rent, say £2,000 a month, just say. It's a lot of money, mind you. And the mortgage is going to be, if they have a mortgage, even 100% mortgage, might only be £1,500 a month. Mm. So why on earth won't you let the the rental payment be as much even as the rent would be, or slightly less? Where when they work their figures out, they may only be allowed to borrow £1,200 a month or something. So the thing is crackers, because if you can prove you can pay £2,000 a month, then surely that should be enough. Now the institutions, I know, said no to Michael Gove. That's not acceptable. But the way round that for me would have been to say, I tell you what, it's acceptable on the basis that it's a fixed loan for 25 years. Yes. Because the argument they had was that what happens if interest rates go up and they can't afford it? Yeah. Well, what happens if they get run over? What happens if they lose their job? I mean, come on. Lots of us could be in trouble if any of those things happened. But I think if you fix it, that would get over that. Now, some people may not want to fix at 5%. Some people might think, well, it might go down to 2 again. Well, if it does, it does. But I mean, I think that would be a sensible way of moving that idea forward, would be to fix the loan for 25 years. But John,
in simple terms, that comes back to long-term finance.
Yeah,
again,
absolutely. It does, yeah, absolutely.
We're never going to solve any of these problems on 4 and 5 years.
No.
Yeah,
it's got to be longer.
And again, I can't see the argument against it, a little bit like you, because if you look at a buy-to-let mortgage, for instance, the lender is quite happy to say, I'm ignoring you, don't care if you're past retirement age, don't care if you've got a job or haven't got a job, don't care what you earn. What I care about is what's the rental value you can prove on that property.
Spot on.
And if you can prove it, do it.
So what's the damn difference?
So exactly, what is the difference?
They're very, very funny about risk-taking for homeowners. They're very sensitive to that compared to what would be a commercial loan on a buy-to-let. They seem to be amazingly cautious, too cautious in my view. And, and the amount of repossessions aren't that high. Most lending institutions will do anything they can not to repossess, especially if there's a family there. And most repossessions, I would argue, at the moment, probably are for couples who are divorced, someone has died, all that type of thing. I bet there's not that many.
A total change of circumstances.
Total change of circumstances. I wouldn't have thought, I haven't got the stats on me, but I'd imagine that the amount of people who have been thrown out of their home because they can't pay their mortgage, because they've lost their job, etc., is very low. And the reason it's very low is, guess who pays the interest on the mortgage if you lose your job? You and me, the council pay. Council pay.
Yeah.
Unbelievably.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean,
there we go.
But I mean, the other thing is we get a lot of this talk back in 2010 when the crunch came down on sort of 100% mortgages and things. But I still don't believe even a young couple at a very young age taking on a mortgage, they don't do it with the idea of defaulting and losing their home.
No.
It's the last thing they want to happen.
Absolute last. So, they'll cut everything. Well, you like to think they cut everything before that. Yeah. But I think fixing it is the answer. Even if you fixed it for the first 10 years, the property market's gone up 5% a year on average for the last 20, 25 years. Okay, it's had lulls and go up again. Sure. But if you have a cycle, a 10-year cycle is safe. Yeah. So you can say, well, let's fix it for 10 years.
And again, I'd go a little bit further, and I'd quite like to see mortgages that can get passed down through the family.
Yeah, well, certainly in European countries, that's what happens.
I think we just have to be more imaginative. It's a little bit like a lot of these assured short-hold leases. Well, things are changing in the lease market, in the letting market, I agree. But I still think, you get inappropriate leases given to inappropriate people. So, you perhaps get a type of landlord, perhaps the smaller, what the government term is an accidental landlord, who can't afford to commit his property for 5 years, but he might well be able to do it for 1 or 2 years. So have a different type of lease. You put your hands up and say, I'm a short-term landlord.
Have a short-term, I agree with you.
I will.
And the tenant understands that and knows that, and that's why they'll take it on. Yeah. Because there's there's less now, 4.2 million private landlords in the UK. How important is that? Hugely important to the housing market. Yeah. And yet this government, and the last government, by the way, as well, the Conservative government,
almost demonised them.
Demonised them. It's a disgrace, a total disgrace. I mean, when you think about it, the Conservative government have done all the hard work for Labour on all these housing issues. Yeah. I mean, that Michael Gove, who I saw at the conference and spoke to him at the conference, he didn't like what I said to him. But at the end of the day, he's thrown 4.2 million landlords under the bus.
Yes, I suppose
he genuinely has. And he didn't like me telling him. No. But there you go. No. That's life.
But again, this comes back to where the government get their information and guidance from. Because, I mean, again, one of the downsides of having such a democratic sort of system is that a normal person, you, I, whoever, can become an MP. You become an MP, and all of a sudden you're given a job as housing minister or something. Well,
no experience whatsoever.
What do you know about it?
Probably own one house.
Yeah.
I mean, if they are bright and articulate and understand it, by the time they get any expertise in the subject, they're gone.
Yeah.
So bonkers.
Yeah, very difficult. Okay, so coming back to the point that we made in the previous programme, you do think this was an emergency budget as opposed to just a statement?
I think they started off as a socialist government with all these fancy ideas of how they're going to make us more of a socialist state, if you like. And within a few months, they've realised that actually that doesn't work. And if they're not very careful, having or destroyed the confidence, the business confidence in the whole country to such an extent that, national insurance, the extra has come in. A friend of mine, he owns 3 hotels / pubs, and it's going to cost him £500,000 more in national insurance. And that doesn't take into account the extra minimum wage that's going up again. Yeah. And like he said, it's not just the minimum wage, John. People who aren't on the minimum wage are now saying, well, hang on a minute, they're earning nearly as much as me now, so I want an increase.
Well, again, coming back to one of the subjects we talked about, which was developers banking land and not developing it. The trouble is, I see, is if the government forces those developments to sort of work on a, need the product sort of production line without the stock of land, so just you've got it, you develop it, you've got another one. The trouble is with that, it's going to cause such a scramble for land at certain points in the cycle that in itself will cause inflation, because land prices will just go through the roof.
Yeah. The whole thing is skewered, and actually, if you try and control what is a free market, you've got a big problem on your hands. A big problem. I mean, if you've got land that the councils already own, which they own swathes of acres and acres of land that could be built on, they need to get their arse into gear and build on it. They don't need to take a 1.5 year consultation to build on, 3 acres with all due respect of scrabby land somewhere. Surely, goodness me, even these big house builders only have, say, 7 or 8 different designs of houses, so they keep the cost down. So wherever you go, they don't individually design a house. They've got 7 or 8 perhaps different styles and sizes, and they just plonk them on.
Yeah.
Well, surely the local authorities could do the same.
Yeah.
If you can't get planning permission and sort it out within 2 or 3 months, then they really need to give up, because it's crazy.
One of my pet things is if you make architects draw something a little bit more conventional and little bit more consistent across the country, building costs come down, prices come down, architects' fees come down. I know, but
they don't like that bit.
No, but it wouldn't be a bad idea.
I agree entirely with you.
Now, look, John, just for the last few minutes of the programme, I'd like to talk to you about a couple of other things that the government are doing. One is the Rental Reform Act,
yes,
of which certain things are being legislated for, but I'm told now that this legislation has been put back again and won't be in till much later in the year, if at all. What do we think about these no-fault evictions? And
well, the Rent Reform Act, I mean, this was drafted originally by Michael Gove and the Conservative government. He didn't get it through before the end of Parliament. They've taken it on and they've spruced up a little bit. I was told it was coming in June. Now they're saying it's going to be later. I don't know why it should be later, particularly because they're hell bent on bringing it out. You know, there are a lot of points to it, some of which are good, and protect land.
I think the main point is, John, that it's going to cause a lot more court work.
Yes, absolutely.
And the courts can't cope with it.
No, absolutely. And the one thing I was concerned about, as a fairly large residential landlord, if you like, was not being able to get possession, because that will drop the market 30% for tenanted properties. If you're tenanted, it'll drop 30%. Now, what they're saying now is, yes, you can get possession of your property if you can prove you wish to sell it, and you can get people out within 4 months. Now, like you said, I'm sure you know, is a lot of these local authorities are saying, they're giving the advice, and they're saying, do not give up your tenancy until you have to, and go to court. Well, an appalling thing to say to people, Citizens Advice Bureau, saying that to people.
But it's the council kicking the can down the road, isn't it?
Exactly, because the council can't rehouse them. But I mean, they wouldn't need to rehouse them if they'd been more decent to landlords in the first place, because they wouldn't have all these landlords selling up. So the whole thing is, and there's going to be a lot of adjustment during this period of time. But I mean, I know 1 or 2 pretty large auction houses, and they are inundated with sort of landlord stock, if you like, stuff that they've got vacant. They're out of the game. They're not going back in it. They want to sell. They want to sell. I
agree. Okay, and then the final subject is of course, the Leasehold
Reform Act.
Yes. Now, here we go. Now, look, I live in a fairly big block of, just trying to think, probably 500 or 600 units.
Amazing.
Well, it is amazing. The service charge.
And you're right at the top, and it's called a penthouse, isn't it, Stephen?
The service charge. the service charge, I believe, is just got absolutely through the roof over the last.
Get what you pay
years.
For, though, don't you, Stephen?
To a degree, but the thought of a bunch of residents in today's litigious society trying to run
absolutely bonkers
a huge block is bonkers. It's madness.
It's madness. Okay, let me a quick brief for the viewers about the Leasehold Reform Act. The Leasehold Reform Act was pushed through the last afternoon of the last government, Conservative government, by Michael Gove. He pushed it through at the last minute as a legacy to himself, I think. No one else was that pleased about it. Certainly the House of Lords weren't. And basically, that gave the residents or the leaseholders even more power than they've already got. Leaseholders have got amazing amount of power. If they don't know it, they have. One, they can get their block managed by whoever they want. They can take the management off the freeholder, and I'm a freeholder of a number of large blocks, and I've lost 1 or 2. They can go to a tribunal, which is virtually free, and at tribunal they can argue their case, whatever it might be, service charge too much, all sorts of things. They want to purchase the freehold, they can do that. And the decision of the tribunal is sacrosanct. There is no right to appeal. It's normally a charter surveyor who sits there and presides over it. So that all the power was always in the Leaseholders Act. Now, Sir Winston Churchill's father was the first person to bring up leasehold reform all those years ago and said it was unfair and it should be common hold. In Scotland, it is a form of common hold. The rest of Europe, it's common hold. So the difference between what Michael Gove has done and what this Labour government are pushing through is common hold. So they are saying that any new lease, when the law comes out, any new lease, so any new flat that's sold will be on a common hold basis. Well, what is the difference between a 999-year lease, which is what it is now, and 0 ground rent? What is the difference between that and common hold? I would say nothing. It still needs to be managed. You still have a service charge. You can still manage it yourself. You can still appoint a management company to manage it for you. All those things you could do anyway. The one difference, the one thing they haven't said what it is, and that is the mathematical calculation of what it will cost to increase the length of an existing lease to make it mortgageable. So anything under 75 years, basically, which is crackers in itself, is unmortgageable according to the lending institutions, which is bonkers, let's be honest. If you buy a flat, you're not going to live 75 years in it, are you? Unlikely to. So, but that calculation is likely to go down. So at the moment, especially in London, some of the big estates in London, of course, where a flat's worth £1 or £2 million and it's got 40 years left to go, to renew that lease to what it was, originally 99 years or 199 or even 990 years, there is a mathematical calculation. Now, we don't know what the new calculation will be, but it'll probably be less than it is now. So if it is less than it is now, do we honestly think that all those powerful estates in London, all those very wealthy freeholders in London are going to put up with it, or are they going to challenge that? Because they make a fortune out of extending their current leases. Yeah. And so we'll see. And
some, quite wrongly, make quite a profit out of the service charges.
Well, I don't think, see, I think you're wrong there, Stephen. Well, I think that used to be the case, but I don't think it's the case now. The scrutiny is much better.
The scrutiny is certainly a lot higher these days, and that's a good thing. But I think the point that I'd sort of end on with this is that again, a little bit like the government demonising some buy-to-let landlords, I don't think the sort of leasehold system should be demonised quite the way it is. People forget why it exists, and it exists simply for good management of the
fairness
of the total block.
Of the whole block. I always say to people this: if you live in a terrace house and it needs repairing, the roof needs doing, the windows need doing, you need to repaint it every 5 years, insurance, general maintenance. You pay all that yourself.
It's down to you. Yeah.
So what is the difference between that and a well-managed block?
Yeah.
Not a lot.
As long as we can ensure good, honest management, then it's fine.
I agree.
I'm not sure the government are the right body to be fiddling with it.
No, I agree entirely with you.
Okay, well, John Howard, thank you very much for coming into
pleasure.
the studio. Thank you for imparting your wisdom.
Thank you.
To say. Thank you so much for that. And I've said before, you have a great knowledge of the whole market, and that's very useful to our viewers. So thank you. Thank you for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Matters.